Hey, this is Rockman. Welcome back to RockMan Reads a Freakin Book, where DK left off. Today I will be reading chapters 45 through 47 of I, Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 45. I screwed the high-energy flux aperture back on the head of the lightsaber and pitched to Elagos the blackened, misshapen lump that had been the diamond I'd put into the weapon. Gone, completely gone. It worked fine when you tested it initially. He snatched the melted gemstone from the air, sniffed it, then rubbed a thumb across it. Synthetic? I nodded. Cubaz zirconia, which I guess is the Star Wars equivalent of cubic zirconium? The crystalline lattice handled the energy while we tested it, but was probably ready to go down any time. I trusted my grandfather's comments about the various gems too much. I should have tested them. Actually serves me right for trying to make a complicated lightsaber my first time out. Elagos frowned. Why did you make one with variable blade lengths? I shrugged uneasily. Well, I guess it was ego. Gantoris made one with 2 lengths, and I wanted mine to be as good as his. I thought you said he had a Sith Dark Lord instructing him at the time. Sure, now you bring that point up. I shook my head. The longer length is useful for surprising an enemy, but not that practical in a fight. A simple block and a good swordsman would be inside my range and carving me up. Blade that long will also cause a lot of collateral damage, which would be fine if I was needing to do a lot of property destruction, but other than that, it's really just an impractical novelty item. Sith spawn. I don't even know of any fighting styles to use with a blade that long. The Kamasi nodded. Perhaps you can develop some when you replace the diamond. Finding a real diamond should not be that difficult. Carbon is one of the more common elements. True, but finding a stone with a proper cut, color, and clarity will be tough, I smiled, or getting it out of the gem cartels at a vaguely reasonable price will be. When you free your Mirax, perhaps she can get it for you. I nodded solemnly. I hope we'll be testing that theory sooner rather than later. I gave the lightsaber another quick glance. At least I got the normal length blade working again. Elagos accepted the weapon from me and clutched it in both hands. I am pleased you managed to repair it and that you survived your ordeal. Now you can admit you were wrong in how you dealt with Shala. My strategy for dealing with him was perfectly sound. Perfectly sound is a phrase seldom used to describe walking into an ambush. The Kamasi shook his head. You were wrong. Not at all, I frowned at him. I really wasn't the one who was ambushed. Shala was. I was just there to catch collateral damage. Another rationalization. I expect better of you. His eyes narrowed. You were wrong. I started to protest, then folded my arms over my chest. Elagos, I was a cop and a fighter pilot. Being wrong just doesn't come with the package. But you are a Jedi Knight now. His statement shocked me with its simplicity and truth. You're right. I'm a Jedi Knight. I was wrong. Very wrong and damn lucky to get out of there alive. The Kamasi smiled. Not lucky, just strong in the Force. You protected others and thereby were preserved yourself. Never forget that fact. No, I won't. I smiled at him, and the cop/fighter jock in me can admit to being grateful to you. Thanks again for the rescue. All in a day's work, Elagos secreted the lightsaber away in a sideboard compartment, then headed for the food preparation station. I've already been out this morning and learned a couple of important things that are the results of your hut encounter. I shrugged on my bedrobe and knotted the sash at my waist. The robe had been one of Tavira's gifts. It had been fashioned from Otagon silk of purple with gold trim at the collar and sleeves. I found it a bit too gaudy for my taste, but I was sore from the previous night's ordeal, and it was light enough not to make me ache. Walking after Elagos in it was a bother, though, with the material trying to wrap itself around my legs with each step. What did you hear? Elagos set out a small platter with fresh pastries and poured me a container of bluish Zurubur syrup that looked horrible but tasted pretty good. The destruction of Shala's gang has caused serious problems. Apparently the Jedi's appearance over the city galvanized some local citizens to form little hunting bands of their own. Several Black Star pirates were beaten and stoned when they left the aviary. Rather nasty slogans have been painted on the walls and doors of some of the Invid spaceport docking facilities. While the locals love the money the Invids bring in, most are afraid that as long as they are here, the Jedi will remain and might begin to go after more than just the Invids. I sighed. I'd hoped the Indigs might see the Jedi as a protector. The people here don't so much want a protector as they do a benefactor. Good point. An idea occurred to me and I smiled. I can take care of that. What else? The clutches you had outfitted with hyperdrives? Yes. Yes? Gone. Appears a couple of the survivors decided they would find surviving easier elsewhere. I smiled. Timzer and Kate? They were the ones you insisted on having trained on the ship so they could instruct others. The Kamasi gave me an appreciative nod. I didn't think they would take the bait. I expected them to remain and oppose the Jedi. I guess they heard there was a rumor that they were the reason I demanded a month from Tavira before becoming her consort. Story goes that I've been spending a lot of my off hours with them in a last grasp at freedom before becoming Tavira's night toy. They're both smart enough to know Tavira isn't likely to care whether or not it's the truth, just the rumor will damage her image and demand retribution. Eligos narrowed his eyes. And where would that rumor have come from? I shrugged. You know me. When I'm drinking, I can't keep a secret, and I'm depressed enough to mourn my love life in public. Well done. He sipped from a glass of the blue syrup, which turned the golden down of his upper lip green until he licked it clean. Will you rest today or keep up the pressure? Nothing breeds success like success. I took a big bite out of a pastry, chewed, then swallowed. The Invid system has one huge weakness, and I need to push and exploit it before Tavira can act. The huge flaw in the way Tavira controlled her groups was what she saw as keeping her safe. All communication was pretty much one way. The HoloNet could keep her informed about big events in the galaxy like a major New Republic push against her subsidiary groups, or events like the Sun Crusher and its destruction, but she was blind to local corpus news. Word of an impending operation reached us when a small craft, like a skip ray blast boat, entered the system and commed directly with the headquarters of the various groups. During these runs, she picked up local news, but until she made one of those runs, she'd not know anything about what I was doing. I handled the benefactor problem rather quickly and mopped up the rest of Shala's crew at the same time. Rak Talik had gathered a small band around himself and set up housekeeping in a warehouse in which Shala had stored a lot of the loot his group had taken. The night after the Great Hut Roast, as it had become known locally, I hit the warehouse, scattered the various denizens, then threw the place open to the public. This action became known as the fire sale, since it was assumed anything left in the place would be burned, and it was picked clean in hours. A few minor scuffles broke out, but visions of a shadowy presence caught in the corner of the eye was enough to quell them. 2 days later, a communications ship arrived from Tavira. I would have loved to have been there to watch the communications officer when he tried to raise Shala and the fast blast and got no answer. The information he got from the others wouldn't have pleased him any better, since desertions had decimated the Black Star pirates and laser lords. Most of the Red Nova crew had gone native, leaving the survivors and Rystar's raiders the best off of the groups. In 3 weeks of absence, the cutting edge of the Invids had been considerably dulled. Eligos and I expected a reaction from Tavira and got it more quickly than we thought possible. Within a day after her communications ship left Corpus, I awakened to a pounding on my suite's door. I heard Eligos' voice, had thrown back the covers and pulled my robe on, but didn't get even as far as closing it when the door to my bedroom burst open and Tavira stalked in. She shoved me back on the bed, then stood there with her fists on her hips looking down at me. Surprised to see me? I blinked and swiped sleep sand from my eyes. Surprised? No, I suppose not. Are you pleased? Yes. Harumph, she eyed me appraisingly. I would think you would show it more. I pulled my robe closed and sat up against the headboard. It's early. And you had a late night. She sat on the foot of my bed. Alone? Completely. She smiled briefly, the same way pet owners do when they discover their animal hasn't messed something up in their absence. Good. And you've not been bothered by this Jedi? I shook my head. I've heard the stories, seen things occasionally, but come to no harm, no. Her eyes shrank to amethyst and jet crescents. But you were there the first time he appeared. What? Tavira brought her chin up triumphantly. The visitation. People have determined that was the Jedi. He warned of his impending campaign against the Invids. Well, this Skywalker won't get away with it. Skywalker, my jaw shot open. You think it is Luke Skywalker? She reached down and grabbed the big toe on my right foot, playfully wiggling it back and forth as she slid forward. Of course it is Skywalker. You blondes, sometimes you can't think at all. Skywalker is the only Jedi with enough power to be able to do what has been done here. The New Republic keeps suggesting he is off training more Jedi, but you yourself noted that he was present at Jafel. We are the New Republic's greatest problem, so it stands to reason they would use their greatest weapon against us. Indeed it would. She moved closer and rested her chin on my knee, smiling slyly. In fact, the news about the Suncrusher's destruction is pure disinformation. No one who had a weapon that was indestructible and capable of annihilating whole star systems would destroy it. No, they're waiting until they discover where I keep the Invidious. Then they will obliterate it. I pulled back, smacking my head on the headboard. Ouch, are you sure the New Republic would do that? They don't seem to have the guts to do such a thing. Corita is gone, isn't it? She patted me on the other knee. They blame its destruction on a rogue, a child. Yet you notice he is lauded as a Jedi now. Since when are promotions given to people who fail to carry out orders? I shivered. I'd never have thought of that. Tavira placed hands on either side of my hips and kissed me gently on the nose. Oh, you would have, my dear. Thank you. Then she slapped me, hard, snapped my head around to the right, and by the time I'd recovered, she stood again beside my bed and glared down at me. I pressed my left cheek to my hand. What did I do? It's not what you did, it's what you failed to do. She turned away from me, but fury poured off her. You should have dealt with this Jedi situation. What? Me? How? I sat forward. I had no way to reach you. Immaterial. All I've heard since I've been here is that you've not drawn a sober breath since the Jedi arrived. The night Shala died, you were so drunk you destroyed a speeder bike and didn't even know it. She gestured vaguely toward the street in front of the hotel. I brought you another one, by the way. Don't destroy this one. I'm sorry. She spun back with her hand raised to slap me again, but she hesitated. You are sorry, and I expect a change. Your behavior must improve. You must lead by example. You must show them not to fear the Jedi. Emperor's black bones. He melted Shala's headquarters. 2 nights ago it was still warm. She lowered her hand. You cannot let your fear show. These Jedi, they are like animals. They can smell fear. It's so thick here I can smell it, and I hate it. Fighting the Jedi is not easy. I don't want you to fight it. I want you to lead the others in opposition to it. You do that, and I will take care of the Jedi. Her fists returned to her hips. As much as I would like to join you there for a proper reunion, I have preparations to make. I'll be back within the week. I expect to see you sharp and in control. She started to walk out of the room, then paused and turned back. Oh, kill Jacob Niv and take command. The man's spirit is broken. If he can't be fixed, he's useless. I'll remember that. Do that, darling. She gave me a wink. It's an object lesson. You would do best never to forget. I did exactly what Leona Tavira wanted. I cleaned myself up and started making the rounds of the remaining groups on Corpus. I visited them all in their strongholds, snapping orders, inventing security procedures, threatening, bribing, hinting darkly that any group that didn't get tough would be melded in with the other groups, losing their autonomy. And of those groups that ran, well, I simply asked if anyone truly believed the galaxy was big enough to let them hide from Leona Tavira. The survivors took heart immediately, and even Jacob Niv seemed to recover some of his nerve. The Black Star pirates remained sullen, but determined to stick things out. The Red Nova crew rallied, and even started talking with the Laser Lords about a merger that would keep the 2 other groups functioning well. Rystar's raiders, who I had largely left alone, started plotting to surpass the survivors and began making overtures to me about shifting my allegiance to them. What was truly great about this effort and the rebound in morale was that it rested very strongly on my representations of Tavira's plans to deal with the Jedi. I quickly let things evolve such that I moved into Shala's position of directly confronting the Jedi. I promised a trap that would destroy him, and I knew, as the Invids put their trust in me, transferring much of it from their trust in Tavira, that if I went the way of Shala, morale would collapse flat and Tavira would lose the combat arm of the Invids. How I would have the Jedi kill me was something I hadn't had time to figure out yet, but I knew it would have to be really spectacular or really nasty. I didn't know which I would settle for. Shala's demise would be tough to top and a bit rougher on me than I wanted to attempt. Grizzly would probably be the best, and I wanted to leave clues to the Jedi living in the city's sewers, so lots of time would be spent hunting down there, while I could be living someplace a bit nicer. To heighten the tension concerning the confrontation, I decided to return to the Crash Cantina. I knew everyone there well enough to be able to blank their memories during my entrance and scramble my features to avoid recognition when I suddenly appeared in their midst. I projected a red mist condensing into my form to cover my appearance, and almost laughed aloud as previously brave men and women recoiled from me, moving away from the bar toward the furthest reaches of the room. I ignited my lightsaber and pointed it at Jacob Niv. "Where is Adanian?" All the blood drained from Jacob's face. "I don't know. He has said he will end my actions. Where is he?" I swept the blade around in a grand arc, causing people to duck or cover their eyes with their hands. "Where is he?" A chorus of denials came back, weak and timid. "Tell him I will meet him. The same fate that took Shala the Hutt awaits him." I kept my voice very low and as menacing as I could. "When we meet, his time will be at an end." I slashed the lightsaber down through the bar and across, whipping the blade through the area where the Savarine brandy and other expensive liquors were kept. The brandy immediately exploded in a gout of blue flame, which lit the area behind the bar and began to spill out onto the main floor. More bottles exploded, and the bartender started screaming, allowing me to step back and make my escape. I slipped into the night amid the shouting and yelling of people trying to deal with the fire, and began taking a fairly quick route back to the hotel. Across the street, I saw a knot of 5 individuals turn and come in my direction. The fact that Genos's brave talk had spawned hunter gangs didn't surprise me, and I dealt with that many individuals before. I ducked into an alley, moving halfway along toward where it turned right and led out to another street, then prepared to project an image of my actually walking further along a non-existent part of the alley. Getting them to chase me and hit the wall had worked wonders before, and if I could take a couple of them out, it would make the rest of the task much more simple. They came to the alley mouth, but didn't run in. When I hit them with the illusion, they didn't shout, didn't point, didn't draw blasters. In fact, they seemed to look directly at me, which meant the illusion wasn't taking. That struck me as odd because they looked human, but since they wore hooded cloaks, I couldn't be certain which humanoid species they were. Since they spotted me, I moved away from the wall and further down the alley. I let the force flow toward them as they walked forward, but I caught no sense of fear or anticipation from them. I could feel them in the force, but I wasn't getting nearly the sort of feedback I expected. Something very odd here. Time to provoke a reaction. I threw back the right side of my cloak and brought my lightsaber out. I thumbed it to life and wove the humming blade back and forth before them. "You don't want any part of this, trust me. Run now and I'll let you live." One by one they likewise freed their gun arms. I set myself to pick off blaster fire, but none erupted. No angry whines filled the alley, no red bolts burned toward me. Instead, blue, yellow, red, orange, and purple lightsaber blades sprang to life in their hands. 5 of them hissing in concert, like a crate dragon hungry for the meal wrapped up in my clothes. They advanced, and I realized there wasn't really any way things could get much worse. Chapter 46. Then a 6th silhouette appeared at the mouth of the alley, and a green lightsaber sprouted in his hands. Great, now we have the whole rainbow represented. I lifted my left hand from my blade's hilt and waved him forward. "Come on, pal, one more won't make any difference." I wished I felt as brave as those words sounded. The man at the alley mouth started forward. "No one need die here tonight." I knew that voice. Luke. And I recognized in his warning to those I faced a directive to me. I slid to the right and blocked a red slash low right, directing the red blade away and into the brick wall. Pivoting on my left foot, I snapped a side kick into my foe's belly, driving her back. I discovered she wore an armored breastplate, which partially shielded her from the strength of my kick. The armor, however, didn't stop her from catching her heels on debris and going down, temporarily taking her out of the fight. Luke engaged yellow and purple as I ducked beneath a blue slash and twisted to bring my left hand up. I caught my foe in his chin with the heel of my hand. The blow shifted the mask he wore up a couple of centimeters, temporarily blinding him. A quick punch to the throat choked him, then I grabbed him by the clasp of his cloak and flung him into the alley wall. His armor clicked hard against the bricks, then he dropped back all boneless and the dead man switch on his lightsaber shut it off. I parried Orange's cut and caught his wrist in my left hand. I shifted my right hand up, then whipped it down and across. My lightsaber's heavy pommel caught Orange right behind the red ear, or where the right ear would have been on a human. As Orange dropped senseless to the ground, his hood slipped back and I saw he was a Rodian. I reached down and flicked his lightsaber off, then straightened up as Luke rose above Red. From her, I only got peace, a peace I found vaguely reminiscent of the peace I'd imagined surrounding Mirax when Exar Kun showed her to me. New trick? Luke shut off his lightsaber, and I did the same with mine, plunging the alley into darkness. Old one of yours. I hit her and knocked her out, just easing some of her pain now. Nice sense of timing. If you hadn't arrived, the 5 of them would have killed me, clean and quick. I shivered. How did you find me? In faint light from the street, I saw Luke's expression sharpen. I knew, if you had learned all you needed to learn, that I would meet you here, and that we would be allies. I felt a chill run down my spine. I see. Luke's voice lightened slightly. As for when, with that I needed some help. He turned back up the alley. Are we clear? A silhouette framed itself in the alley, prompting me to laugh. I see no pursuit. Oral? I hopped over Orange's body and ran forward. Oral, what are you doing here? I am a findsman. The Gand shrugged as if that should have explained everything. The important thing of being a findsman is not knowing where to look, for that is easy. It is knowing when to look. I knew the when was now, and went to Master Skywalker to tell him that. He pointed me here, and I brought him now. Luke waved us back into the alley. We have to get our sleeping friends out of here. We have a ship, but I need somewhere else to keep them. They know where Mirax is. I nodded. Can't be far from here, because Tavira brought them within a day of hearing we had Jedi trouble. Who are they? I don't know. Luke shook his head. We better find out, and find out fast, because if we don't, if someone learns they failed in their mission, it may cost Mirax her life. I reached down and hefted Orange up by his belt, letting Ural grab Yellow and Purple. I know where we can take them, but getting information out of them will be tough. They know how to use the Force, and I'm not sure we can break them enough to find out what we want to know. I think I have something that can help us in that regard. Luke gestured, allowing Red and Blue to float up into the air. Lead on, Kieran. As Oral explained it to me, when is just an aperture in time, and we don't want it to snap shut before we can get through to your wife. We took our 5 opponents back to the hotel. I called Elagos and had him meet us in the back at the freight lift. Oral left the 2 he'd carried to Elagos, then returned to the spaceport to fetch something for Luke. Awaiting his return, we stripped our prisoners out of their armor, separated them, and treated the cuts and bruises they'd earned in the fight. When Oral returned, he brought with him a cage-like device that had suspended itself, he brought with him a cage-like device that had suspended inside of it a small furred reptile. A nutrient mix flowed through a network of tubes sustaining the creature, which, if it were capable of movement, seemed singularly disinclined to show it. I did see it blink an eye, but even that movement was slower than I would have expected in a living creature. This is an Yalsamiri, one of 2 I brought with me. Luke rested a hand on the cage and looked a bit fatigued. It is unique among living creatures, at least I don't know of any others, in that it seems to project a field that negates the Force. On its homeworld, some predators evolve with a Force sense that lets them hunt, so its negation sphere acts as a camouflage. Okay, that's why I felt so weird. Thought I was just tired. I tried to reach inside myself to tap the Force, but I got nothing. It's like I'm back where I started, back before the Academy. Luke nodded. You're fortunate in that you spent most of your life only having a fringe sense of the Force. I've been involved much longer than you, and in the presence of a Yalsamiri, I feel lost, like a limb has been lopped off. Luke flexed his mechanical hand. Worse, actually. How do you think this will affect our guests? Luke managed to smile, but that seemed to tax him. I think they've been involved with the Force longer than I have. They seem to armor themselves well with it. I suspect they will feel very vulnerable. Good, I gave him a feral grin. Just what we want if we're going to get anything out of them. Just follow my lead. The Jedi Master caught hold of my shoulder. I've not done anything like this before, interrogating prisoners. I winked at him. It's okay. I know enough for both of us. Just stay over there by the door and look as malevolent as you can. Keep your face straight, and you really don't need to say anything. Malevolent? Think Hutt, but with eyebrows. Got it. We picked Red to be the first subject. Actually, Elagos did, for reasons of his own, but I didn't mind. Interrogating women is always tricky, mainly because they tend to be suspicious of any claims made by a man and often believe they can use their looks and wiles to fool a detective. Red, who really was a slender beauty with wavy brown hair and blue eyes, could have melted many of a detective's steel heart. But the surprise and fear twisting her face as she awakened robbed her of her beauty. The Yalsamiri made me feel as if I was seeing in black and white, so for her it must have seemed as if she was blind. When I saw her eyes flicker open, I looked back at Luke and nodded as if I'd received a telepathic message from him. Yes, I will see what I can find out. Give her a moment to recover. Luke stared at me for a second, then impatiently flicked a hand in my direction. I smiled. Quick study. Let's hope she isn't. I squatted down next to the chair in which we had bound her. Forgive me for having to restrain you like this. I wish I could make things more pleasant, but he's rather insistent. I know you're feeling odd right now because you have lost the use of certain senses you consider part of you. He has removed your access to them to make it easier for me to probe your mind, but I know how unpleasant that will be for you. She shook her head adamantly. I will not betray my people. Her words came stiff and pronounced slightly oddly. Precise, that's it. It almost seemed as if she were speaking with the same very proper diction my grandfather used. It was a data point, not much of one, but a point nonetheless. No, of course you don't want to do that. I don't want you to do that. But we have to find the Invidious, and find it quickly. Leona Tavira has to be stopped from being able to harm anyone else. I'd almost ended my sentence at the word stopped, but I caught a momentary hesitation of her breath, which made me add the extra phrase, we really don't want to see her hurt anyone else. You can't stop her. I glanced back at Luke, then turned to her. He says that just because you could not stop her does not mean we cannot. Sorry, he always makes things sound so dire, but the fact is he's right. I've been here for months on many operations where you or another of your brethren were on the Invidious and you never detected me. Why not? Because he was shielding me. You know you looked, you know you tried, but it wasn't until this evening when we wanted to trap you that I revealed myself enough to let you find me, and you never even detected him. I stood and walked over to confer with Luke, letting her mull over what I'd said. I raised a finger to my lips to keep Luke silent, but frowned to get him to give me that expression. When he did look at me angrily, I recoiled. But you can't be so cruel. To remove her access to the Force forever isn't going to do her or us any good. Sure, it might teach her a lesson, but so would having a bantha trample her. I don't think she should be made an example of. It won't make the others more tractable. Luke really got into his part, jabbing me hard in the chest with 2 fingers. I did an about-face, rubbing my chest, and returned to Red's side. I really do think I can get him to unblock your access to the Force. I really do. You just need to tell us where Tavira keeps the Invidious. I mean, we already know you managed to keep it hidden. You're very good at that stuff, hiding and all. No, I cannot tell you. None of us will betray our people. I sighed and rested a hand on her shoulder. Well, I know you're thinking about things from your point of view, and maybe even thinking about them from Tavira's point of view. That Star Destroyer is very powerful, and for you to be working with her, you've got to be afraid she's going to turn it on your people if you betray her. I understand that. It's crystal clear. I let my voice drop a bit in tone and volume as I leaned forward. Thing of it is this, though. You didn't get me. You didn't get him. Tavira, when she doesn't hear that you succeeded, will see you as having failed, and you know her. Failure isn't an accident, it's a conspiracy. The way I see it, and I know her almost as well as you do, she'll see herself as betrayed at this point and act. What you have to ask yourself is this. Do you want to be the cause of her killing all your people, or do you want to let the guys who defeated you take their run at Tavira? Chapter 47. Red cracked a little, and we were able to use what we learned from her to bust the rest of the Gensarai, that's what they call themselves, wide open. What we got from them was incredibly interesting because it came wrapped in a strange philosophical package that equated Obi-Wan Kenobi with Darth Vader in terms of being Jedi exterminator. The Gensarai were trained as Jedi were, even to the point of constructing lightsabers and training with them, but it was not nearly the transitional point for them that it was in the Jedi tradition I knew. For the Gensarai, their crowning moment, their full growth into becoming one of the Gensarai defenders, they had apprentices, defenders, and Sarai Kar, of which there appeared to be only one, was the creation of their armor. They started with a basic armor shell and covered it with spun cortices or fibers, providing them some modicum of protection against all sort of weapons. They styled their armor after whichever creature they felt best possessed or expressed their personal desires for service to the Gensarai community. and if the armor we'd taken from them was any indication, the creatures chosen were all defensively minded. Creatures that remained hidden and dormant until pressed, then they proved deadly. The history of the Jensarai's involvement with Tavira was one of mistakes from the start. Tavira, fleeing a New Republic task force, jumped to the Suerbi system in the Quent sector. The seventh planet, a gas giant, had a big ring of asteroids around it and over a dozen moons. One of those moons, designated Suerbi 7-5, became known as Susavi to the colonists who had decided to tame the world centuries ago. Though similar to Yavin 4 in size and rotational speed, Susavi ran to more savanna-like grasslands, much like Nokevorzor, a planet on which I had been stationed before Rogue Squadron took Coruscant. A couple of human settlements grew up, and the Gensarai were located outside the large seaport, Yumfla. Tavira and some of her people had come down to Yumfla, and she immediately went to work on the local imperial governor, a petty bureaucrat who made the last mistake of his life by rebuffing her advances. Tavira had him shot, then declared the planet liberated from the oppression of the Empire and in opposition to the oppression of the New Republic. The Sarai Kar of the Gensarai went to Tavira and heard everything she wanted to hear from the Admiral. Tavira cultivated trust, then betrayed it, and put the Gensarai in the position of protecting their fellow citizens, who were not even known of their existence, by serving Tavira. Failure to serve her would result in the annihilation of Yumfla. The Gensarai had picked up on Mirax's intentions when she'd come hunting the Invids. They nabbed her at Nal Hutta and brought her to Sivesvi. Tavira had wanted to slay her, but the Sarai Kar had insisted on keeping her alive and imprisoned in the old planetary governor's palace. Learning what we had, Luke and I knew we had to hurry to Sivesvi, and we had to make a difficult decision because we could not bring the Gensarai with us. A change of heart in just one of them could spoil any surprise we could generate, crushing our chances for getting into the stronghold where Tavira was holding Mirax. We decided we'd leave them on Corcus in the company of the Yalsamiri. We knew we had to trust someone to hang on to them, so we went to Jacob Niv and revealed to him my identity as Kieran Halcyon, Jedi Knight, and that of Luke Skywalker. We explained to him that we were going to finish the Invids and stop Tavira, and offered him a choice. We could destroy the last of the survivors, or give them the same chance at a new start that the New Republic had offered other victims of Imperial aggression and coercion. Niv accepted the chance to start over. With the New Republic gaining strength and the last vestiges of the Empire in retreat, the survivors were losing their anti-Imperial focus and just becoming thieves. Without the protection of the Invidious, the New Republic could have and would have smashed them a dozen times over. He willingly exchanged entertaining 5 guests and a Yalsamiri for a new life. He looked at me hard. One thing, Genos, how do I know you'll succeed? Why did you fight the Empire all those years? To avenge what happened to my friends. I nodded. Right. Leona Tavira has my wife. I'm fighting so I won't need to avenge anyone. Niv's eyes tightened. The two of you are alone? I winked at Luke. We've got some allies, and one is really big. We'll do fine. Before we left Corcus, we shot 2 messages out. One went to General Kraken, telling him we had located the Invidious' home and were going to take the ship out. Data letting him know where we were going was left with Niv, but we didn't transmit it directly to Kraken because we didn't want a New Republic task force showing up and learning to Tavira what was going on before we had a chance to get in and rescue Mirax. If the New Republic made a move, the Gensarai at Suvesvi could still pick up on it and alert Tavira, dooming our rescue attempt. I also sent a message to Booster telling him that I'd located Mirax and was going after her. I didn't give him even as much detail as we gave Kraken, but I did note I expected to have her safe and sound within a couple of days. The message said I'd bring her to the errant venture for rest and recovery first thing. We'd wanted to leave Elagos behind, but he insisted on traveling with us. He and Oral had begun to get along famously, a trend I found profoundly disturbing, meaning that the two of them bonded while comparing experiences of sharing quarters with me. Elagos pointed out that the small ship which Luke and Oral had brought to Corcus was notoriously difficult to handle with one pilot, and since he could fly, he should back Oral up just for appearance's sake, if nothing else. Luke or I could have easily filled the second seat role, but we were going into Sivesvi within the protective bubble of the Yalsamiri's force repulsion. It would effectively hide all traces of us from any of the Gensarai defenders stationed in the planetary ring, as well as those on the ground. The ring defenders regularly used their force powers to get a sense of incoming ships and to subtly direct them away from and to subtly direct them away from noticing the faint center I think this is a misprint here. This is not me screwing up and reading incorrectly. There's actually a misprint here, I think. And to subtly direct them away from noticing the faint sensor phantoms of a Star Destroyer hidden in the rings. Whatever, just a misprint. Even without the Gensarai hiding the ship, the Invidious would have been tough to pick out of the rings. With the Gensarai in place, such spotting was all but impossible. Luke sketched out on a padded bench in the small ship's lounge. Luke stretched out on a padded bench in the small ship's lounge and draped an arm across his eyes. If we had more Jedi, we could have accompanied survey ships and probably have picked up on the Gensarai efforts to hide the Invidious. Could be, but I only noticed them when they were at close range and trying to probe me. When I contacted Tycho at the Battle of Jaffel, they picked me up, and I never even detected their presence. I stood and walked over to the food prep station. I pulled a prepackaged Zerber syrup container from the chiller unit. Want something to drink? Luke peeked out at me and nodded. Sure, toss it. I lofted it toward him, and it landed with a plop on his belly. He woofed loudly. I smiled. You're supposed to catch it. He sat up, nipped the corner of the package off, and spat it out. I was trying to, but inside the field the Samiri puts out, my effort failed. I tore open the corner of my syrup container and sipped. Tough being normal again, isn't it? Luke sighed heavily. First 18 years of my life, I didn't have a clue about the Force. I was just a farm boy who liked to fly. I wanted to join the Imperial service and become a pilot. Jedi Knights were ancient history, and old Uncle Owen didn't encourage me to study that history. I know, it was kind of the same in my house. I dropped onto the bench at Luke's feet. Just didn't talk about the Jedi that much. I knew my grandfather had known one, worked with one once, but it was kind of like mentioning an ex-wife at a family gathering. Of your new wife's family, right? I laughed. Yeah, there you go. You know, when I saw my grandfather several months ago and could see the pride he'd taken in helping hide Neja Halcyon's wife and child, I learned how difficult it had been for him to keep all this stuff hidden for so long. I think I disappointed him when I rejected my Jedi heritage to pursue the Invids on my own. I'll have to let him know I've reconsidered. I'm glad you did. Luke sat up and patted me on the shoulder. Hard to tell what felt worse, having a student turn to the dark side or having someone just walk away because of my teaching. I shrugged. You know us Corellian Jedi, notoriously contrary and bent on going our own way. My conversation with Eligos flashed through my mind. I owe you an apology, by the way. I never put aside my expectations for the Academy, so I never really gave you a chance to train me. Accepted but unnecessary, Luke gave me a nod. I didn't make it easy for you. I've got to remember that parallel tracks are not better or worse, just different. We're still heading in the same direction. True, but that still doesn't mean I'm entirely comfortable with things like Kip's track. Tavira has it all worked out that Kip killed the Kurita system on orders from the New Republic, and there are going to be a whole bunch of folks who believe her. I know, and I understand how you feel. Luke drank for a moment, then licked away a blue liquid bead forming at the corner of his mouth. It could be suggested, though, that the deal we offered Jacob Niv and his survivors is really a lot like the chance Kip had been given. In dedicating his life to being a Jedi, you know Kip is really under something of a life sentence. I know, and it'll be hard labor, too. Killing him wouldn't make the galaxy any better. So this is likely the best solution. I drank, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes for a moment. Doesn't mean I like it, and doesn't mean my inability to come up with a better solution isn't frustrating. All we can do is our best. Luke laughed wearily. So tell me, did you ever figure you'd be hurtling through hyperspace planning to assault an Imperial Governor's palace, which is now the stronghold for a renegade Imperial Admiral and her crew? I opened one eye and screwed it around to look at him. Tatooine must have been really, really bad if that was the kind of fantasy life you created for yourself. It wasn't that bad. Right, I was there once. On any other world, the Jawas would be the size of huts, but on Tatooine, they shrink. Good thing, too, or imagine what they'd cart off. Luke smiled. Actually, I have good memories of Tatooine, more than bad. But you wanted off that rock. In the worst way. His smile died, and I got it. I reached over and grabbed him by the back of the neck. Yeah, but it brought out the best in you. And that means the rest of the galaxy gets a shot at realizing its best. Losing your uncle and aunt had to hurt, but I bet they are happy with the return their investment of their lives got through you. Think so? Yeah, no doubt. I smiled at him. Here within the Yalsamiri bubble, Luke seemed to lose some of the brooding oppression that settled on him when he remained aware of the universe around him. The optimism and uncertainty he had known as a boy shone through. You had no brothers or sisters, right? I mean, you grew up alone. Except for friends, yeah. Me too, I smiled. And no, I never imagined I'd be heading out to an Imperial Governor's palace to face down a renegade Imperial Admiral. Oh? For me, it was racing off to Nal Hutta to face down a hot crime lord in his own den. Talk about stacking the odds against you. I laughed. I'm a Corellian, remember? Right, forget I said anything about odds. Luke finished his drink and crushed the container. I guess all of us get dealt cards we don't want in life. True enough, the trick isn't how you play them. Some people have the greatest cards in the world and still lose. I nodded at him. For a farm boy growing up on dust and dreams, you've not done half bad. From a Corellian, that's quite a concession. The bridge comm squawked. Oral says we have 5 minutes to reversion, then about an hour to transit to Sevespi. Better get ready lest our reception be hotter than intended. I slapped the transmit button. We copy, Eligos. We'll be set. Luke got up, crossed to the shelf where he plugged his lightsaber into a recharger, freed the weapon, and clipped it to his belt. Okay, here we go again with this recharging lightsabers like they're phones. Again, I don't remember that being in any of the movies. No, he just plugs it into, a USB-C charger or something. I don't know why they don't have wireless chargers, in the future. Oh, wait, this is not the future. This is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away where they had lightsabers and rechargers. Anyways, he likewise unplugged mine and looked it over. Nice work, dual phase. I frowned. Tried to repeat Gantoris' feat of engineering. Right now only one phase works. Gotta find a real diamond. Dual phase blades seem to be something of a fad among Jedi at certain points. He tossed me the lightsaber. Still, I like the blade and it seems well made. A little bit ugly, but I used what I had available. I caught it and screwed the pommel cap on. Standing, I stretched, then clipped the weapon to my belt. One question before we get going, if you don't mind. Sure. Okay, us Jedi, we're only supposed to be using our powers to defend. We're going to be assaulting a base. Luke nodded. Right. We're acting to defend Mirax's life and the lives of Tavira's future victims. I'm with you so far, but I'm wondering if we don't have a little more immediate moral obligation, say, concerning those folks who will see us as aggressors. I frowned. I'm guarding something, and I see a guy coming at me with a lightsaber. I'm going to shoot. It's that certain point of view thing. The Jedi Master frowned. I see a problem. When I had to deal with Jabba the Hutt, I warned him to let us go or he'd be destroyed. He didn't listen, and that was more or less the end of that. So, warn those who might not realize what they're doing? Luke nodded. If we can find any down there. An Imstar douche ships, 10,000 stormtroopers? I don't imagine the Invidious is fully crewed anymore, but she's got plenty of folks at her disposal. Want to guess how many are down guarding the palace? Doesn't matter. I tightened my robe's belt. The Emperor didn't mint enough of those guys to keep me from rescuing Mirax. They can run or they can die. Their choice. Corellians. Luke shook his head. No wonder the other Jedi didn't want you leaving your system. I winked at him. The rest of you were just afraid we wouldn't leave anything for you to do after we were done. I hope you're right, my friend. Luke hooked his thumbs in his belt. A mission like this will both have more than enough to do. Luke and I had tried, albeit briefly and in vain, to get Oral and Eligos to remain behind on the ship and monitor starship traffic in and out of the system. A comlink call could warn us about Tavira's Invidious moving out or anything else that could cause us to shift our plans. Oral and Eligos had anticipated us and programmed the ship's computer to pull down all system traffic data, then relay it through a scrambled comlink channel to the datapad Eligos had jury-rigged to receive the signal. Eligos noted that between his sense of smell and Oral's ability to see beyond what we humans rather arrogantly call the visible light spectrum, we could move through the night more effectively and without having to rely upon our force-enhanced senses, delaying our detection by the Jensari. I had to agree with that point, and having seen Oral in a light fight before, having him with us didn't hurt at all. He carried a blaster carbine and a string of power packs slung across his chest. Eligos hefted a blaster carbine and strapped a belt of power packs on around his slender waist. I looked at him and narrowed my eyes. You don't want to be a part of this, do you? You don't want memories of the killing here. I am coming with you. And if I do not carry a weapon and assist in our defense, I will be just a burden. If you fail because of me, that memory would be worse, and I will not have it. I intend instead to have memories of your saving your wife to carry with me. Eligos held the weapon up in his left hand and thumbed a lever, and the stun function on this weapon seems to work. I smiled, then looked at him and Oral and Luke. Before we go, I just want to thank you all. Better friends a man's never had. You're all insane, but friends nonetheless. Eligos looked at Oral. Corellians never know when to stop talking, do they? Oral's mouth parts opened. Other Corellians do. Luke laughed, then jerked a thumb at the egress hatch. Let's go do something else Corellians never shy from. Let's beat some long odds. We stalked through the darkened streets of Yumfla with impunity, all but unnoticed. Months ago I would have found that to be curious, but not after the time I'd spent with the Invids. In this city, those who were not part of the Invidious crew enjoying leave, or were not patrolling the streets, stayed home. They lived in an occupied city, and while some of them might make money by supplying goods and service to the Invidious' crew, most wanted nothing to do with the ex-Imperials. I'd felt the same sort of tension in Vlarna, and was glad of the insulation it provided us from the normal folks. The crewmen themselves presented no problem since they were on leave and only looking to enjoy themselves. This kept them indoors on a hot and humid evening where a cantina's environmental control unit could make the night bearable, drinks could make it pleasurable, and company could make it exquisite. Dirt patrols, meant for picking up sick, stupid, or belligerent spacers and returning them to the ship, barely gave us a second glance. Eligos' nose picked up the scent of the armor well before we saw the Stormies, allowing us time to slip away down a side street or gather on a corner unobtrusively. Finally, we reached the building across a small greensward from the Imperial Governor's Palace. The building itself had an 8-meter-high wall running around it, with towers at each of the 4 corners that rose up another 2 meters. A large recessed, arched entryway split the wall in two, but had been closed for the evening with 2 massive metal doors. Stormtroopers patrolled in pairs along the walls, and 2 each stood in the corner towers. The palace itself had been set up in a triangular pattern with towers at each of the points. Left and right were 2 smaller towers, each a good 15 meters in height and twice that in diameter. Directly back from the gate, the triangle's furthest point had a rectangular tower that rose to 30 meters in height. The central third of it had been shrunk by a couple meters on each side, as if a giant fist had closed around it. It made for an interesting architectural look that differentiated the palace from most of the local buildings. A 4-story tall foundational building connected all 3 towers, and a private shuttle pad had been built into the roof of the big tower, which is why it had blinking lights crowning it. 20 meters to the gate, I crouched down, unfastening my cloak and letting it slide off my back. I boosted a pinch of dust into the air and watched it blow toward the palace. At least we have a tailwind. Good. Oral and Eligos cover us. We weave our way there. Eligos cleared his throat. The gate is closed. How do you propose we get in? We each brandished our lightsabers. We'll knock, Luke offered, real loud. What are you doing there? A stormtrooper and his partner appeared from nowhere around the corner of the building shielding us. Let's see some identification. Sure. I stood slowly and held my lightsaber like a glow rod while I motioned with my left hand as if digging for identification. I know I have something here. I thought that I might be able to project an image into his brain that would get him to go away, but my mind blanked. The stormtrooper took a half step toward me. You look familiar. Me? No, can't be. Trying to be smart, the stormtrooper's blaster came up to cover me. You're coming with us. I glanced at Luke, then shrugged and pressed my thumb, shooting the silver blade straight through the stormtrooper's chest. I shoved him back into his partner, knocking his blaster aside. The second stormtrooper still pulled the trigger, spraying shots out into the night. My lightsaber came across and trimmed his shoulders down to the level of his armpits, ending his attack. Luke stared at me. You need to work on this idea of warning. Didn't get a chance with them, no. I ducked down as the stormtroopers on the palace wall started shouting and firing shots in our direction. Alarms began to blare. But the others, I think they're all sorts of warned. I suggest we go now. Luke and I sprinted toward the palace gate, cutting back and forth to make ourselves difficult targets. As I ran, I opened myself to the Force and felt a flood of data pour in. I planted with my right foot, cut to the left, and whipped my lightsaber around to the right, batting a blaster bolt out into the night. Another 2 steps, then hesitation as fire from an E-web mounted in the right tower slashed against my path, then a dive and roll over the streams of bolts starting to track toward me. I fended off 2 more bolts, wishing I could manage as Luke did, to direct them back at the men who had fired them, then reached the sanctuary of the recessed gate. I pushed my sphere I pushed my sphere of responsibility to see what was on the other side awaiting us, but found no one. I pushed further and then smiled. I have her, Luke. This close, I have Mirax. Tower your side down. The Jedi Master smiled. Let's not keep her waiting. In tandem, we slashed left and right from the center of the gate and down through the big metal doors, carving a hole large enough to admit a land speeder. I stepped inside, then slashed up and through the elbow of a stormtrooper, shoving his blaster carbine down to spray us. He screamed and reeled away. I tugged the carbine from his falling hand and triggered a burst of bolts at a stormtrooper hunkering down from Elagos's covering fire. I hit, sending him spinning from the wall, then sprinted after Luke. Luke scattered a half-dozen bolts fired at him, sending 4 back at the tower from whence they had come. One stormtrooper went down, the other just ducked, but the E-web sparked and started to burn. Luke sliced the barrel from the blaster rifle carried by the lead stormtrooper running from the tower where Mirax lay, then dropped him with a backhand blow that separated the man's pelvis from everything that normally rested on it. I snapped the selector level over to stun, then shot the next man in line. Elagos came through the gate and peppered the next 3 with stun shots. They all tottered and fell. Luke dashed into the tower doorway. I saw a flash and heard a blaster whine, but the green lightsaber continued to hum. Oral came through the gate and laid down a pattern of suppression fire that held off the Stormies coming from the far tower. Elagos and I covered him as he retreated to the tower, then we entered and I sprinted straight for the stairs leading down. This took me past 2 Stormies with their assorted parts scattered in awkward positions. One level down, I caught up with Luke at the mouth of an octagonal corridor festooned with sunken doorways. He stood by a control panel scanning a readout of prisoner names. Calling up a prisoner roster now, I glanced at the list and tapped a name. That's her. Holding cell 02021020. I nodded and ran down the corridor. Here it is. I reached the door, shot the lock, and watched the door retract amid a shower of sparks. I took all 3 steps in a leap, then stopped just inside the doorway. There she was, just lying there, as Exar Kun had shown me. The little gray device on her forehead flickered with green and red lights, and the silver light from above her bathed her in a radiance that left her skin almost pure white. It reflected true from her black hair. She looked perfect and asleep, and I felt my throat tighten. You are incredibly beautiful, Mirax, and you've been away far too long. What's it been, like a year? Luke squeezed past me and leaned over by her face. Don't think this is what's keeping her under. Feels like a Jedi hibernation trance. Normally a person can't be placed in one against her will, but if this device broke down her resistance, it might have been possible. I nodded. I've had experience with machines breaking down resistance. I set my lightsaber and blaster down on her bier. Take the gadget off, let her wake up. Luke pulled the device away and smashed it against the wall. It'll take a bit more than that to wake her up. He reached his hand toward her forehead. There's a Jedi technique used. I grabbed his wrist. Know of it. Read about it in my grandfather's notes. I smiled at him. She's my wife. I'd like to help. You bring her out of it, and I'll let her know she's been missed. Luke nodded and waited for me to come around onto Mirax's other side. Ready? Let's do it. I gave him a nod, then leaned down and kissed my wife on the lips. And that is the end of that chapter. And a lot happened really quickly. Luke showed up to save the day. We learned a lot of stuff about what's going on. And there are only 3 chapters left. So I will see you next time for the finale of I, Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole.